Hello students, welcome to our flipped lesson on pronoun problems. Today we're going to be talking about 3 different situations, and our goal is to choose the correct pronoun case in an incomplete construction with an appositive and in a subordinate clause that uses who or whom. Now, first we're going to focus on what are called incomplete comparisons, which may be a new concept for you. So I have a definition. An incomplete construction is created when a comparison is made using the words than or as. So first of all, we need to be on the lookout for the words than or as in the sentences, and note that they may be setting up an incomplete construction. So the rule is to use the same pronoun in the incompletely constructed sentence as you would in the finished sentence. Now what this means is that when you see the words than or as, you need to complete the sentence, that the verb has been left out. And so finish the sentence and choose the pronoun that would be correct in that sentence. So for example, number 1, Mr. Bilot is taller than I or me. Now, I'm going to be honest. It sounds weird to say Mr. Bilot is taller than I. It sounds correct to say Mr. Bilot is taller than me. However, complete the construction after the word than. Mr. Bilot is taller than I am. So it's grammatically correct to say Mr. Bilot is taller than I. In the second sentence, I didn't do as well on the test as she did or as her did. You would say she, so the sentence reads, I didn't do as well on the test as she. In the third sentence, you study more often than I or me. Complete the construction. You study more often than I do. So you study more often than I. In the fourth sentence, Jane is as old as her. Jane is as old as she. So if we complete the construction, it should say Jane is as old as she is. And it would read, Jane is as old as she. I know it sounds really odd, but when you see the words than or as, remember to complete the construction and choose the correct pronoun. Now we need to talk about pronouns and appositives. Sometimes you will see a pronoun preceding or following an appositive, and it's sometimes difficult to know which pronoun to take in those cases. So when the rule is that when the pronouns we or us are followed by an appositive, eliminate the appositive to determine which pronoun to use. If the pronoun is used in the appositive, we're going to eliminate the preceding noun to determine which pronoun to use. So in number 1, we, us, divers refuse to explore the ship. The appositive is the word divers because it's identifying we or us. I'm going to drop the appositive and try the pronouns. Would I say we refuse to explore the ship, us refuse to explore the ship? It's we. So the finished sentence would read, we divers refuse to explore the ship. Now in number 2, the museum paid the explorers, Ron and I, Ron and me, for the find. Now this one's a little bit tricky. First of all, let's try dropping the name and focusing on just the pronoun choice. Let's also, because technically Ron and I or me is the appositive, I'm not going to drop the appositive. I'm going to drop the noun that precedes it, explorers, technically the explorers, and I'm going to try just the pronoun. Would I say the museum paid I, the museum paid me for the find? It would be me. Now I know this is going to go against some really well-intentioned adult who told you that whenever it's a name and a pronoun, you always say I, but that well-intentioned adult was wrong. Sometimes it is supposed to be me, and we're going to talk about some more cases like that shortly. All right, the best debate of all, the who versus whom debate. Now, first of all, we need to understand the difference between the two words. The word who is the nominative form, and nominatives, as we know, are used as subjects and as predicate nominatives, which means they follow linking verbs. The whom form is the objective case of the pronoun, which means that you use these as objects, direct and indirect objects or objects of prepositions. Now the rule is that you use who in the subject of a sentence, question, or subordinate clause, and you use whom when the pronoun is an object. And I just realized I also forgot to say we use who in the subject of a sentence, question, or subordinate clause and after a linking verb, because then it's a predicate nominative. All right. Now, there are several tips that we should review to help make this a little bit easier. So tip number 1, think of the word who as the pronoun he. Think of the pronoun whom as the pronoun him. Hopefully you'll be able to keep those straight because whom and him both end in him or in M, which means when you're trying to figure out if you should say who, whom, try he, him instead. Sometimes that makes it a little easier. Tip number 2, isolate the subordinate clause and determine how the who or whom functions only within the clause. Don't look at the rest of the sentence. All right, and then tip number 3 is if who or whom follows a linking verb, we're going to choose the nominative form of who or the pronoun he. And then lastly, tip number 4 is to rephrase questions as sentences to determine which pronoun to take. All right, let's try out some examples. All right, so first of all, Alex is the student whom got a perfect score. So first of all, isolate the subordinate clause, whom got a perfect score. Now, this pronoun whom is preceding the verb got, which means it's the subject. So I'm going to take the nominative case. Also, remember who is like saying he got a perfect score. You wouldn't say him got a perfect score. All right, number 2, I saw Ellen whom I knew from school, and whom I knew from school is my subordinate clause. The subject of this subordinate is I. The verb is knew. Knew is an action verb. So I'm going to rephrase this subordinate clause and say, I knew whom from school. And if I put whom after the action verb knew, I would say the objective case, which is whom, or the word him. So let's try it again. I knew him from school. So we say whom. All right, number 3, that is whom I saw. Again, isolate the subordinate clause, whom I saw. Now, I'm not going to pay attention to that linking verb in front of the subordinate clause. I'm only going to look at how the whom functions within the subordinate clause itself. I have the subject I have an action verb saw, which means this should really say I saw whom. Because saw is the action verb, that makes whom the direct object, so I'm going to choose whom. And remember that it could be replaced with him. You would say, I saw him. Number 4, the show was successful, but it could only be seen by whomever could travel to New York. So my subordinate clause is whomever could travel to New York. Again, I'm going to disregard the rest of the sentence. I'm not going to pay attention to the fact that this subordinate clause is preceded by the preposition by. It has nothing to do with the subordinate clause. So I'm only going to look at how the pronoun functions in the clause. So the question is, what's the subject and verb of this subordinate clause? The subject is the pronoun itself, whomever, because whomever could travel is my verb, my action verb. Now, because it's the subject, I want to choose the nominative case, which is whoever, also is like the word he. So he could travel to New York, not him could travel to New York. All right, number 5, this one is a question. So when you have a question, you should rephrase the question as a sentence. So do you know whom she is? And I want to, actually, I'm going to isolate just the subordinate clause instead, because I have a subordinate clause, whom she is. So in this one, if I look at how it's set up, my subject is she, my linking verb is. So she is whom. Now in this one, it's kind of goofy. You have a linking verb, and so you're going to choose who or he, and this is going to sound so weird because first of all, you have a female pronoun for the subject of the subordinate clause, but it should be she is who instead, and which sounds like she is he, but I know that's a little bit odd. But again, in the subordinate clause, the whom is functioning as a predicate nominative because it's following a linking verb, and so I would choose who.